This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, the podcast designed to help you step out of the shadows and become an inspirational leader. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and each episode I will be getting to grips with a leadership topic by interviewing an expert in their field. I'll be picking their brains for those golden nuggets that will help you be the best you can be. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing at thereluctantleader.co.uk, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So let's get on with the show. In today's episode, I'll be talking to Ali Stewart about Attitudes and Behaviours. Ali Stewart is an entrepreneurial executive and leadership coach who teaches the award-winning Liberating Leadership System to leaders across the world. Ali and Derek Biddle have been testing and developing the model together for over 20 years. She runs the accreditation body for facilitators wanting access to the model to help their clients and has authored other powerful books in the series. Ali is a liberated leader of her own company. Hope you enjoy this episode, and I will see you on the other side. So welcome, Ali, to the Reluctant Leaders podcast.
Thank you very much, Mark.
It's great to have you here. I must admit, you were right to the top of my list when I decided to start this podcast, and I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Good. So we're going to be talking about some the attitudes and behaviours of leaders and how a reluctant leader can actually instill better attitudes and behaviours in their team, and also have a better attitude and behaviour themselves. Before we get stuck into that, I'd be really interested to find out what was the pivotal moment that started you down the path of what you do and why you do it. What was that moment?
Oh, well, that's quite curious, Mark, because I had been building a management consultancy with a couple of others for many years. And we were using a great many psychometric tools which seek to understand the mind. And in 2003, I went off on the 4-day Insights Discovery Accreditation. I thought it was just another tool to add to our kit bag. But the 4-day accreditation blew me away. And when I got back to the office, I said, I just want to do this now. And they said, no, you can't. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I've got to go and do this now. So I started my own company in 2004 just to be able to coach with the Insights tool. But curiously, while I was growing the management consultancy with chartered occupational psychologist Dr. Derek Biddle, we had been working together on a leadership program, which I took with me. I was kind of holding it. And then when I started coaching people with insights to look at themselves and their own style, it just automatically led to discussions, because I said, your leaders could really do with help. Can I come and talk to you about your leaders? So one thing led to another.
That's excellent. And from what I know, the Liberating Leadership program that you use now, that wasn't initially what you started with. You had something else that you started off with. Is that right?
Well, all the while Derek and I were developing it, it was called Leading and Developing High Performance. It was simply a working title. It was a bit of a mouthful, but we couldn't think of anything better to actually describe it. So as we were developing it, it became a training manual, and we were testing it with all of our clients. And clients at the time were big companies like Gillette and Vodafone and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Friends Providence, Severn Trent Water. So big private companies, big public organisations, local authorities, loads of other companies up and down the country. And we tested and refined the work and wrote questionnaires to help leaders along the way. And then in 2012, Insights brought out their deeper discovery model, which talks about archetypes. And one of my archetypes was liberator. And liberator is all about transforming people and setting them free from their limiting beliefs. And I just thought, that's wonderful. That absolutely describes what I do in all of my work. How about I rename Leading and Developing High Performance, Liberating Leadership? And now it's attracting worldwide acclaim.
Absolutely, and I think the important lesson there is to find something that sort of fires you up and it gives you a vision, which is obviously part of liberating leadership. You talk about visioning, and once you have that vision, it's so important, isn't it?
It is so important. It's actually the very first step of the leader's journey, because if you don't have a vision, how are you going to hold your people accountable? You know, they'll just be doing their own special thing. You can't give them tough feedback unless you know what you're giving them feedback on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the old saying: if you don't know where you're going, then any road will do. It's setting down the right path, but it's not an easy thing to do, is it? It's it's not something we can just sort of, well, we know exactly where we're going, because we can set a direction. But I think that the important thing is it's setting that direction. It's not necessarily where we end up, but we've got to actually set that direction.
Exactly. And an example of that is working with the leadership team of a primary school recently. And I was trying to help them to set their vision. And it was to, have a happy place for children and help them to learn and grow. So this all sounds very normal. Why would I bring my child to this primary school instead of the primary school 2 blocks down? And I said to the head, you're fairly new. What did you see when you came here? Why did you want to be the head here? He said, well, it's a very poor community. The parents don't have a great regard for the school, and there are bars on the windows. And he said, I thought it looked more like a prison. And I walked around here during my interview, and I thought, I want to get the bars off the windows. Now, when he said that had a visceral reaction in me, because now I want to do everything I can to help him get the bars off the windows, because that means developing the children, the staff, the community, the parents, everybody around.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a simple vision, isn't it?
Simple,
we just put it into one sentence. I want to get the bars off the window. It's a great cause. And people can buy into it very easily. So it doesn't have to be a complicated thing, does it, the vision?
No, it doesn't. And certainly my own vision in liberating leadership is simple. It's hard, but it's simple. And that's to help every leader on the planet make developing people their number one priority. Yeah. And so often when I go and talk to leaders in organizations and I say, where in your daily task list does the task of developing people come? And they look sheepish and they say, Ali, it's right at the bottom. And on most days, it's not there at all.
Yeah. And it's so easy to get stuck into the day-to-day stuff, and isn't it?
It's so easy.
A challenge for people. And it's not about making things, well, it's about making things as easy as we can, but obviously not making it sound as if it's easy, because it isn't. It needs some commitment. And obviously a vision at the beginning. So that's all great stuff, Ali, and I think will resonate with our listeners today. So let's just move on to the topic that we're going to sort of delve into today, and that's attitudes and behaviours. It's something that you cover in the Liberating Leadership book, and how would you sum up how attitude and behaviours affect a leader and the team that he leads, or he or she leads, I should say?
Well, what I notice with leaders, Mark, is that they tend to get very tied up in the emotion of a poorly performing team member. And when I talk to them, they say, do you know what they did then? And they did this and they did that. Can you believe that? And they're so wrapped up in the awful wrongdoings of the person. And I think they fall into the trap of thinking that they have to fix the whole person. And in fact, leaders only have to address attitudes and behaviours. And just to explain, we talk about the onion model. If you imagine people like an onion, we're made up of many, many, many layers. And at the very heart of us is our personality. Now, no leader has the right to try and change anybody's personality. That's not nothing to do with the job they're doing. Also, that the layer next to the core are the values we hold dear, the values we learn from our parents, from our school, from our country, our society, the world, how we choose to live our life. And again, that's nothing to do with the leader. All the leader needs to be concerned with is, do they have the right attitude to do the job that is expected of them? And is their behaviour such that they're doing that to the standard I want? So if leaders just focus, and they're the outer layers of the onion, if you like, and they're much easier to change. If you try and change personalities and values, which are at the heart, it will cause all sorts of problems.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that I come across quite often is that, especially when you start talking about doing like testing, you mentioned insights, and there's lots of those sort of profiling tools out there. People are a bit sort of standoffish, thinking that, oh, you'll just want to find out stuff so you can change everything about me. But it's not about that, is it?
No, it's about understanding more about the way you work and what motivates you. Because now I can look at your attitude, and attitudes are the underlying beliefs or approaches to work and life which underpin your behaviour. And behaviours are what you actually do, how you handle clients, how you talk to each other, how you talk to the leader. And you get into so much difficulty. You know, there's been court cases where, you know, people have worn a crucifix to work, and you know, that's gone all the way to court because that is attacking the person's central values and beliefs. That's nothing to do with their attitudes and behaviour.
Yeah,
it does not affect your job role if you've got a crucifix around your neck, for goodness sake.
Indeed. And we all get wrapped up in as to the meaning of things, and actually
Yes.
It's nothing to do with the job and the role that they're trying to do. So what I think we hear a lot of is that people just make statements about it's an attitude problem, or these sort of statements. So how do we go across over that sort of, you know, it's their attitude? How do we sort of instill a better attitude?
The problem that leaders have got is that they're never taught how to do this at school. So they've learnt their skill, they've learnt their trade or profession really well. They are totally lacking in understanding how to do this, and this is why they struggle. So if somebody has got a skill issue, it's much easier for them to deal with. They can just send them on a training course, simple. They learn the skill and bam, they come back and hopefully they do it. So often it's attitude getting in the way, and leaders are frightened about dealing with it because the people are very good at deflecting, you know, their behavior. It's because of this, or it's because of that, or because so-and-so did this, or because that system's rubbish. And they can argue their way around things and tie the leader up in knots. It's really important then for the leader to get very clear about what the attitude actually is. So some people will say, oh, you know, they've got a terrible attitude, they don't use their initiative. So I say, tell me what they're doing when they're not using their initiative. Well, they don't come in on time, they don't talk to their colleagues, they don't see what needs to be done. You know, they start giving me much more behavioural things that we can now address.
Yeah. And one of the things that, again, you address in Liberator Leadership is identifying the reasons, as you mentioned. But when we look at what people do or what they're not doing, we can quite clearly, well, not quite clearly, but we can think about what they're doing by whether they are doing it because they can't do it, or not doing it, I should say, or they're not doing it because they won't do it. And there's obviously a big difference there.
There is a big difference, and sometimes if people don't have the right level of skill, and that means they can't do it. They couldn't do it if their life depended on it because they haven't learned that skill yet. If you then train them in the skill, it then can remove the won't do problem, the attitude problem, because sometimes they try and hide the fact that they can't do this thing, which causes their attitude to go a bit awry. So if you can address one, it often addresses the other one as well.
So part of that is actually having a culture where people are willing to admit that they can't do stuff, and so encouraging them to come to you and say, look, I don't think I can do this.
Yes. And part of that is the leader's mindset. Mm-hmm. So if the leader has high expectations of the person, I want you to succeed. If they're treating the person with positive regard, belief in them as an individual who can succeed, and also genuineness. So if they're open with them, look, this is the vision, this is what I want you to do. I am going to give you feedback every day very clearly on whether your behavior and attitude is such that you're going to help us achieve the vision. Is that helpful? And most people want to know if they're doing well or if they're not doing well, and what can I do to improve?
Yes.
So they usually thrive when there's that kind of environment going on.
Yes. And I can't really move on from that without mentioning the importance of explicitness, which is, again, something that you talk about in the book, about learning to be explicit. I've had lots of conversations around, well, what did you actually say, and what was the outcome? And if you actually take responsibility for the outcome as to if it didn't happen, then what did I do? What could I do more of, or what could I do different to make sure that the outcome is right? Being the leader, and being more explicit is really important. But again, it's not easy, is it?
No, it's not easy. And, culturally, in some organizations, it just doesn't happen because they have a more possibly bolshy attitude. I was chucked in at the deep end and I've made my way, so I'm going to chuck them in at the deep end. All sorts of things can be getting in the way, and being explicit does take longer in the short term, but it reaps dividends in the long term. So if we're imagining somebody is coming into a call center, you're a call center manager and a new employee comes in, you might look at their CV and think, well, they've worked in 3 different call centers before. I can just stick them on the phone and they'll just get going. That is so totally wrong, because they don't know how you do things around here and how they're going to be measured here in this environment. So if you say to them very clearly, look, in this organization, we expect the phone to be answered within 3 rings. If it rings for any more than 3 rings, that will be a bad mark against you. It's just simply not acceptable. We answer the phone within 3 rings. Is that clear? Yes, that's totally clear. We switch off from whatever else we're doing when we answer the phone, and we smile when we pick up the phone, because that comes across when you speak. And we use the person's name. We ask them for their name and use their name throughout the call. Is that okay? Does that feel comfortable for you? So you're giving the people very explicit instructions on how they can succeed, and not just leaving them to fail.
Yes, and this is I come across this quite often with managers not wanting to almost not to be too specific, and that almost like undermines them, and the skills they know that they've got the skills. So they think that if they tell them specifically what they want, it's almost like saying, well, you're not really capable. Whereas actually what they're doing is that, like as you've just described, is that there's different ways of doing things. This is the way we do it because that's what is right for us, and it's in line with our values, and that's the way we do it. It's just the way that the things work.
That's absolutely right. And part of explicitness is also making it super clear what will happen if they don't do the thing.
Yeah.
So that people know, if I do this, I'll succeed, and if I do that, I won't. It makes it very clear. And, we can see lots in films, like the film Coach Carter with Samuel L. Jackson. When he goes to meet a new unruly team of basketball players in a high school, he goes in with a contract. If you want to play on this team, these are the rules. Practice starts at 3 p.m. As of 2:55, you're late. If you're late, you do push-ups. So they know exactly what they have to do to succeed or fail.
Yes, I remember when I was on your course, Ali, you talked about your son, and I think that resonates with definitely with parents. I think the stories around him putting his washing out on time.
So yes, when he was 15 years old and very unruly and very loud-mouthed and stroppy, he thought he knew everything, and he was in danger of being expelled from a very good school. So that the question to him was, do you want to achieve your GCSEs or don't you? The answer was yes. So then I had agreement to coach him. So one of the, as you rightly remember, Mark, one of the things was, because I said, well, just sort out your whole life while we're here, shall we? And he agreed. So I said, your washing must be in the washing basket, which is outside your bedroom door, by 7 p.m. on a Friday night. If it's even 7:01 p.m., it will be late and there will be a penalty. And he and I had agreed a whole list of penalties, like, remove your mobile phone for the weekend, or, a whole list of things. Mm-hmm. So if I just said to him, your washing must be in the washing basket by 7 o'clock on a Friday, it could be open to interpretation. Maybe she means around 7 o'clock, maybe 5 past will be okay. He was under no illusion it could not be any later than 7 p.m. And then the first time he did it, if I'm setting down these goals for us to achieve, as the leader, I need to be there to see it. So on the very first Friday, I go to the washing basket at 7 p.m. and his washing is in there. And I just want to say, hallelujah, I've waited 15 years for this to happen. But instead, I need to recognize and reinforce that behavior that I want. So I knock on his bedroom door and I say, hey, Sam, that's terrific. Thank you so much for putting your washing in the basket. Can you do that for me again next week? And of course, he's all smiles because he's pleased his mum now, and that's all he actually wants to do. And so the washing consistently was in the washing basket. Once he was doing that consistently, I don't need to comment on that anymore. We move on.
Yes, and it's a great example of what gets rewarded gets done. And there's another love stories. Another story in the book about the snake and the frog, and that's so. If you want to just for our listeners, just to sum up what that little story was about.
So the little story requires you to imagine that there's this chap who's got a day off work and he's going to go out on his little boat on a lake fishing for the day. And so he climbs into his boat and he casts off. It's a beautiful day. He casts his line. He lies back in his boat, looking up at the blue, blue sky, and he's at peace with the world. And after a while, there's a tug on the end of his line and he reels it in. And on his line, there is a snake, a live snake with a live frog in his mouth. And the chap thinks, well, that's not very nice for the frog. So he takes the frog out of the snake's mouth and pops it back in the water, and it goes, swims away, happy little frog. But then he's now left holding the snake, and he thinks, well, that wasn't perhaps the kindest thing I could have done for the snake. But all he's got in his boat is his little hip flask of brandy. So he thinks, oh, well, and he gives the snake a little slug of brandy and then pops the snake back in the water. And he lies back in his boat thinking he's done well, happy snake, happy frog. And then 10 seconds later, there's a knocking on the side of his boat, and up pops the snake. And this time it's got 2 frogs in his mouth. So the moral of the story is what gets measured gets done, as you say.
Yes, indeed.
I get 2 frogs for brandy. Great.
Yes,
brandy.
And it's so easy though, isn't it, to try and please everybody.
So easy.
But like I said earlier, it's what comes back at you is actually a reflection of what you've done, and you've got to obviously take that on board and say, well, yes. Okay, I didn't want that outcome. What could I have done differently to get the outcome that I was wanting? And so we've got to obviously be aware of that. And it's obviously, we learn by our lessons and being aware of the things that are happening. And if we carry on doing the same things, what can we expect?
You'll get what you've always got.
The same things. Great stuff. This has been really interesting, Ali. I just think before we finish off, I'd like just some pearls of wisdom from you. And what I'm going to ask you is what 3 things can we do to help with better attitudes in 2 ways, really. Firstly, for ourselves as a leader, and secondly, how can we instill better attitudes and behaviours in our team?
Well, for ourselves, we've got the lovely OK Corral model, which comes from transactional analysis, Mark, which if you just check in with yourself before you need to have any discussion with a team member, how am I feeling about me right now? Am I feeling competent and okay, or am I not? And how am I feeling about the other person? Do I think they're an okay, decent person, worthy of me talking to them, or not? Because if you're feeling anything less than feeling I'm okay about me and I'm also feeling okay about you, the conversation is not going to go very well. So just check in with yourself. If you're feeling a bit jaded about the person, just go and make yourself a cup of coffee first before you talk to them and get yourself into an I'm okay and you're okay state. Mm-hmm. That's really helpful.
Yep.
When you're talking to them about attitude, make it specific and make it behavioral. What about their attitude is wrong, so that you can give them very clear feedback. And a third thing, just be kind to yourself. You're not going to get it right all the time. So the best you can do is keep trying and trying again. And just keep doing it until you get it right. And write things down just to clear your head.
Yes. And I suppose that what you've talked about there is actually just, like you say, give yourself time and breathe. And if you're feeling under pressure, try to, find the best way to take that pressure off yourself, I guess. Absolutely right. And breathing and drinking water and just taking 5 minutes out is a great way of just restoring your sense of self. Yeah. The simple things make a big difference. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ali. It's been the time's flown by, and I know that you've given great value for the listeners. I will put all the details in the show notes and how you can contact Ali and find out a bit more about Ali and what she does and liberating leadership. And so for now, thank you, Ali. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for listening today. As action leads to outcomes, make sure you make a note to start, stop, or continue doing whatever struck a chord in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe at thereluctantleader.co.uk, where you'll find links to all the past episodes, vlogs, blogs, and how you can get in touch with me. Until next time, bye for now.